I fisted God and wondered why. My little Annie, my butterfly. Seems to me you were much too young. Your little life had just begun. My memory serves me, so I cried. Little Annie, my butterfly. Such a tiny road, you bore a heavy load. You flew away before your time. Goodbye, my butterfly. Now I'm counting on you, I rely. Someday I'll spread my own wings and fly. Up there in heaven we'll understand why. Little Annie, my butterfly. Such a tiny road, you bore a heavy load. You flew away before your time. Goodbye, my butterfly. Goodbye, my butterfly.
The song was sung by Gail Lynn. As a matter of fact, I have Dennis and Gail Lynn with me this afternoon. Dennis and Gail are, boy, lifelong friends just about. But why we have them here today with us is about 15 years ago, they lost twins. Their twin granddaughters died. And I just wanted to revisit that because a part of the healthy grieving process is not being afraid to remember, talking about that grief, talking about what you went through at the time, and now on the other side of it, how you managed and how you got to be where you are today. So Dennis, we'll start with you.
Well, right when it happened, it was quite a blow. I often hear people describe getting that news like being punched in the stomach, and it's a very accurate analogy, really. But I remember being hit very hard like that, and it's like over time, over a long, prolonged time, it just very gradually fades. It's like each day it hurts just a little bit less. Although you do climb up and kind of hit a crescendo, and there's that, it's like that top of the mountain you're never going to get over, but eventually you do. And I think over time those thoughts are replaced with all the good memories that you had with them. And
right. You know, I remember the granddaughters, of course. Brittany was very young when she died, and then Sarah, she was 18 months, I think, if I'm not incorrect
19.
on that, 19 months old. And you know, they were quite young, but still, even them being so young, that impacted you, I'm sure, greatly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the hardest part was not only the grief and the horrible, painful loss, but on top of that, watching my daughter suffer.
Yeah, of course. I remember Sarah being in the house, and of course she was ill all of her young life, and you guys, and of course all of us playing with her, and she was attached to all the little apparatus, and she would crawl around, and really, what a beautiful girl. And I can imagine how much it must have devastated you, and of course Amber and the family. But here you are now, 15 years later?
It gets less painful as the years go by. It was more painful at the time, and we just have the hope that we are going to see her again.
Yeah.
So we remember her personality. She had quite a cute personality.
Yeah, and she did.
And yeah, she did have a trach and tubing and stuff, and she couldn't really talk, but she showed her personality through everything, and so we remember that. Remember how she was and how fun she was, and just have the hope that we're going to see her again.
You know, and as we're talking, of course, I knew her only briefly, the few visits over to my home and such, but I can remember, and I can see her vividly, and you're so right, Gal. Even though she was young, the personality was there, and I guess that's what we really hold on to, that personality. But let's go back to that impact of your grief, because what I want folks to see is all these years later is how you managed it, and how you got through it and where you are today. The other day you were giving me an analogy of grief, and what was that?
The losing someone suddenly like that, in my mind, of course, being an artist, I everything's visual,
Yeah.
and I picture this sudden devastation that happens as suddenly a hole that shows up in the middle of your living room. You have a wooden floor, and with no explanation or reason, bam, this hole is there. And you have to live with that. And you have to come to grips with that. And as you're living your life and walking through your house, you'll forget the hole is there, and you'll fall into it, break an ankle, bloody up your shin, and it hurts.
So once in a while you get ambushed by the grief.
Yeah, exactly. And so what happens over time is you learn to recognize the hole. And you kind of steer around it. You learn to step over it. You learn to avoid it. What ends up happening over time is you so recognize the hole, that emptiness that's there, that you actually almost become fond of it. It's kind of a strange way of putting it, but the final solution is you finally figure out it's an excellent place to put a piece of furniture.
How perfect. So do you replace that furniture over the years, or has it become very stationary? What do you do with the grief now? And of course, Gail said it, and I agree with you both, that over the years, memories do fade, and the sting, that initial impact, it fades away. And you said it, and it's not really that crazy. You actually almost begin to enjoy, or you look forward. I often tell people, and I go out on a limb, when they're in the middle of their most devastating time, as a grief counselor, I tell them, I promise you that your tears of suffering and sorrow will turn into tears of joy. And that's exactly what you described to me.
They say that time heals all wounds. It really is true, but it's kind of hard to see, just like with the holidays upon us. As children, we're so anxious for the holidays, for Christmas to show up, as those last 7 or 8 days just seem like an eternity. And just like the grief thing, it's an eternity getting through it. But when you come out on the other side, it's a beautiful view.
I like to celebrate. We remember the birth and the death anniversaries, so we don't want to ever forget. We think of her, we'll put up little pinwheels at the gravesite, and it's just good for us to keep the thoughts alive, to celebrate either of those occasions.
Yeah, anniversaries are very important. I'm glad you brought that up. In what way? I mean, have you created any little traditions or rituals over the years that might include her?
Well, just to put the pinwheels at the gravesite and remember her on that day,
so that's
for her birthday.
Well, how beautiful. Of course, it is difficult, I know, sometimes bringing up these memories. And I'm sure when I first asked you if you do this for me, I'm sure that you might have been even ambushed a little bit. But how do you deal with those ambushes, those times when that pain comes back intensely Or correct me, after 15 years, do you still get some of those moments?
Sure. It kind of enters as it's a hit, but it's not as hard a hit as it was when it was fresh. You know, it's more of a jab in the ribs, and you kind of take a moment and you swallow it, and you know that it's going to pass rather quickly. And as it passes, as it fades, up come the wonderful memories. The times of chasing her on all fours down the hallway while she's trailing her trach tube, and her laughing version was one of wheezing through the tube. But that was her laughter. That was the only sound we ever heard from her.
Wow. And so, boy, that time was brief with her, but how powerful those few months that you had. And as you said, Gail, her personality so developed, and that is the spiritual connection, is the personality. That's what we remember. That's what we foster and what we build on. And as you said, that's the hope that we have of being reunited in eternity. Mm-hmm. Well, we're just about out of time for today. And Dennis and Gail, I so thank you. I wish we had more time to talk about this. Because people need to hear that there is life after loss. Mm-hmm. People need to know that you can make it, and it's so important to talk about it. As I said last month, just briefly, I think one of the most important things is telling your story. And, here it is 15 years later, and I'm listening to you as though you're telling me for the first time, because it's just that important that we tell our stories. So thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, this was great. And thank you for the song. Your rendition was just beautiful. Dennis and Gail wanted me to say that I wrote that song, and it was a special song to me. And I gave it to Gail, and I said, would you perform it on the show? And just you interpret it as you will, and I'm very, very pleased. So thank you for what you did for it. Mm-hmm. Again, this was A Grief Observed, and we really appreciate you tuning in. And please know that there is life after loss, and that you can go on. And if there's anything that we can do for you, please get in touch with me. My number is 928-358-2047. Thank you.